This is Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James, and here's what's ahead. Sudan's main protest group says the army isn't serious about handing over power and calls for a rally. In response, the military issues a warning against unrest. Algeria's former prime minister in court, Ahmed Ouyahia, questioned over possible charges of squandering public funds and undue advantages. And in Mali, thousands take part in the annual Grand Mosque plaster. Our team was there to capture the ceremony in the historic World Heritage city of Djenné. In Sudan, both protesters and military leaders raising the temperature of their standoff. Tuesday, the ruling military council warned protesters they will not accept any chaos in the nation. This after opposition organizers called for a mass rally to take place later this week. They say the army is not serious about handing power to civilians. On top of this, both sides are still trying to negotiate the creation of a joint civilian-military council. Our correspondent, Julia Steers, is covering the story for us in Khartoum and joined the program earlier. I asked her how the atmosphere feels there.
Situation at the site of the sit-in has been a very celebratory atmosphere for the last few days and weeks, and today it felt very different. Protesters since this morning were saying that they were angry that the military reportedly tried to dismantle their barricades last night and then insisted in public statements both last night and today on Tuesday that they dismantle the barricades, that they allow traffic to circulate freely here in the capital, Khartoum. So certainly there were tense words from both sides. We heard from the military again today, who said that they will not tolerate chaos. They asked the protesters to leave the site of the sit-in. The protesters on their side certainly dug in as well. They rebuilt the barricades. The head of the protest movement said that they did not feel that the military was committed to these negotiations, and they did not feel the military is committed to genuinely handing over power to a civilian-led government. So the protests here in the capital, Khartoum, this evening are certainly, as big or bigger than we've seen in the last few days, and there's no sign that they will back down.
And what's the status of these ongoing negotiations over the creation of a joint council that would run the country instead of the ruling military council?
Well, the negotiations stalled over the weekend after both sides agreed to form this joint council, which is intended to be a transitional government to govern the country until elections can be held. Now, the actual sort of sticking points are how many representatives from each side will be on the council. So the military saying they want 7 military leaders, 3 civilian leaders, the civilians rejecting that ratio. But really, in the last day or two, it's been less about these procedural issues and more of a ramping up of rhetoric on both sides, a war of words, with the military seemingly cracking down on the protesters and the protesters firing back that they will not go anywhere and that they don't truly believe that the military is committed to forming this joint civilian-led council.
Our correspondent Julia Steers in the Sudanese capital. South Sudan's president has hired an American lobbying firm to block the creation of a war crimes court, and the nation is paying them 3.3 million euros. Gainful Solutions is run by a former ambassador to Kenya, and we know the deal's details because the contract was published online by the U.S. Department of Justice. It indicates that the group was hired in part to delay and ultimately block the establishment of the African Union South Sudan Hybrid Court, which would investigate crimes that took place during the country's civil war. The rain is still falling in northern Mozambique. The government's death toll from Cyclone Kenneth has risen to 41 people. And the United Nations says aid workers are having incredible difficulty reaching thousands of survivors. With days of more wet weather in the forecast, authorities are urging residents to flee to higher ground. Rivers are expected to reach flood stage by Thursday. This is the first time 2 cyclones have hit the country in a single season, with Kenneth landing in the north just 6 weeks after Idai struck the south. Former Algerian Prime Minister Ahmed Ouyahia was questioned on Tuesday as part of a wide-ranging corruption investigation. Since President Abdelaziz Bouteflika was ousted, judges have been investigating members of his inner circle. Nicolas Germain has the details on the possible charges.
A large crowd gathered in front of the courthouse. Inside, judges were questioning former Prime Minister Ahmed Ouyahia about alleged corruption. Protesters said they want to see him behind bars.
We have come here to demand that the judges hold Ouyahia accountable for his crimes. I need to see him go to prison with my own eyes.
They stole our money, and we find it so hard to live. We are tired. We want to see justice prevail. Let God help us.
Ouyahia was Prime Minister 3 times during Abdelaziz Bouteflika's 2-decade rule. He was ousted earlier this month following weeks of protests. Since then, several of Bouteflika's close allies have been questioned about alleged corruption. Among them are Issad Rebrab, Algeria's richest man, and former Finance Minister Mohamed Loukal. While Abdelmoumen Ould Kadour, the head of the state oil firm Sonatrach, has been fired. According to the International Crisis Group, the regime is using this anti-corruption drive to settle internal scores. On Tuesday, the head of the army, Gaïd Salah, said the ideal solution to the crisis was a presidential election in July. But protest leaders say they would prefer a transitional government. Otherwise, they believe the election will not be transparent.
Mali is home to the largest mud structure in the world, the Grand Mosque of Djenné. Keeping the building in good condition requires that each year the town comes together to protect it from upcoming rains. This Sunday, the annual plastering took place, and France 24's team was there.
Covered in earth, and their faces giving away just how tired they are. Because since 4 in the morning, several thousand people have been rendering the Great Mosque of Djenné with adobe to protect it ahead of the rainy season.
The plastering of the mosque is a tradition and a festival. We do it once a year. The whole community, all the residents in Djenné take part, and everyone around here too. There's nothing else like this festival here. It's important to us.
Spring doesn't come cheap, at over 10,000 euros for the Great Mosque, paid for by the community, the authorities, and the diaspora. Families living in the old town at Djenné can't all afford to recover their houses each year. The prices of materials, such as the mud and rice bran used, have been increasing.
Recently, with the drought, crops have been failing and there hasn't been any more rice bran. That's just one example. And so now people have to go beyond Djenné, further afield to try to find it. You have the transport costs, and where they end up, the prices are different, so it's been getting very expensive.
Changes in agriculture, growing populations, and the jihadi threat. Some of the factors hindering the maintenance of Djenné's traditional architecture and archaeological sites, and compounded by the loss of tourism revenues to the area since Mali's 2012 crisis.
There's no work. People who are doing crafts or working as guides and other things for tourism, they've all had to find other things and go into the countryside to loot the sites. So, for example, if you go to the Djenné Geno site, you'll see that they've made a real mess of their searches.
As a result, UNESCO has had solar panels installed at the Great Mosque and is compiling an inventory of damaged buildings.
And finally, the Saint Louis Jazz Festival in Senegal is renowned for attracting musical greats from around the world. The city has come alive this week, and our correspondent, Sarah Sacco, went to capture the sounds.
Music has taken over the city. Dozens of concerts are taking place on and off the main stage during the Saint Louis Jazz Festival. Year on year, the festival's built its reputation as one of the country's top cultural events, attracting more and more visitors and world music fans.
It's amazing, like the buzz and the energy, and there's so many people who've traveled from all around the world to be here, and it's just been absolutely fantastic.
Je viens de Texas, je suis un grand fan de jazz, un grand fan de Saint Louis.
This year marks the festival's 27th edition. Nearly 3 decades of bringing the world's best musicians to the city. Yet the Saint-Louis Jazz Festival is probably best known for its lineups of African artists.
Everything I have I owe to the festival and to the city of Saint-Louis. This is where everything started.
Ablai Sissoko is taking part in the festival's fringe event this year. The master of the Senegalese kora always makes time for his native city's music festival, despite a busy international career.
For me and for so many other local artists, Saint-Louis Jazz Festival introduced us to the world, helped us become famous. And so the festival has become a part of us, a part of who we are. For me, as soon as the festival ends, the first thing I worry about is next year's edition. I want to know what the dates are.
Music lovers have until Wednesday evening to come and enjoy live music from around the world here in Saint-Louis, Senegal's jazz capital.
The Saint-Louis Festival runs through Wednesday night. And that concludes this edition of Eye on Africa, but do stay with us here on France 24. There's more news coming up next.